Hello and welcome to episode 107 of Driver Suit Blog Radio. As always, I'm your host, David G. Firestone. So last weekend was a pretty big sports weekend here in the U.S. In addition to the Classic at the Coliseum, I also watched the NFL Pro Bowl games, the NHL All-Star Weekend, and the NASCAR Mexico Series. And I'll discuss the latter three a little later on, but we have to start with the Clash. Now, due to the weather issues that were plaguing Southern California this last weekend, they had to move the race to Saturday night. It was a regrettable but necessary decision. And I'm wondering about the TV ratings due to moving the event up to Saturday evening. Because it also didn't help bringing in fans since the Coliseum was nearly empty. And again, it was the right move to do, but it isn't good for bringing in viewers and fans. So we got our first on-track looks at the new Toyota Camry and the new Ford Mustang. We'll start with the Camry first because I really like the new Camry. When you compare it to Camry models of years past, it looks really slick, and it performed really well too. Now, let's talk about the new Ford Mustang because it has a new front decal. The decal specifically has little details that are, color-wise, so close to the original background color they are nearly invisible. Now, early renderings had a silver Ford Mustang logo, but the logo was black on the on-track car, which looks really odd. It almost looks like there's nothing there. It's just like a black hole sort of thing. And if they had the silver logo, I could at least get behind that. But the black one does not look good. The black Ford Mustang logo does not look good. It looks really looks really plain Jane. When it comes to the race itself, I still think the Clash should be at Daytona. I also, again, think that the lack of pit stops really hindered the Clash as a race. When you have the top national series always have pit stops, when you take them away, the lack thereof makes the race as a whole not as great as it could be. But you know what? It was still a fun event. And of course, with short tracks, tampers were flaring, and it was fun, and NASCAR's officially back for 2024. Now, not long after the Clash ended, the NASCAR Mexico Series held their first race. I believe this is their first race in the United States. I may be wrong. It's not available here on any of the channels that we have, so I've never watched it before. I was interested in seeing it. Well, I'm probably gonna mispronounce this, and I apologize if I do. The King Taco La Batilla and El Coliseo was a good race. I like the look of the cars, though I don't get the idea of the TV numbers on the windshield. I really don't get that. You have them on the sides, you have them on the roof. Why have them on the windshield? What does that accomplish? With that said, the racing was really good, though it did get confusing since I don't really know the drivers and teams on the level that I do other racing series, but it was a fun little race, and hopefully there will be more of the NASCAR Mexico Series on US TV soon. Now let's get to the two All-Star games that happened this last weekend. Get a sip of water, my throat's a little sore. There we go. Let's start with the NHL All-Star game, because the NHL All-Star game is why I've totally lost interest in All-Star games. When it was the best of the Eastern Conference versus the best of the Western Conference playing a traditional game of hockey for bragging rights, I thought that was a lot of fun, and I thought it was great hockey, and it was fun to watch. But I guess the idea of the best in the game fighting for conference supremacy isn't fun enough because they've taken the All-Star game to a 3-on-3 elimination tournament. And then in 2024, they added the fantasy draft where the two biggest All-Stars get to draft their own teams, which is just, no. I just want to watch, it's just... They introduced that in the NBA some time ago. I'm sick of that too. And it didn't really lead to compelling hockey. And the tournament format can be clunky. At least they didn't go round robin. And it was really hard to get into this version of the All-Star game. But now I will say it wasn't terrible. But given what it used to be, it wasn't great. I just like less is more with an All-Star game. Just have the best in the East fight the best in the West for bragging rights and maybe financial gain, but it's just not good. Sorry. Then came the NFL Pro Bowl games. They were even worse, if you can imagine that. The idea of the best players in the NFC versus the best players in the AFC playing a traditional football game for conference supremacy and bragging rights is always a good event. But they've gone the route of the minigame compilations because we all know that minigame compilations is a great way to have games, right? No. This version is actually even worse than the NFL because instead of something that resembled a traditional football game, which is what we got in the NFL, which is what we got with the NHL All-Star Game, we got the NFL's version of an elementary school field day. So these are the events of this year's Pro Bowl games as described by Wikipedia, link in the description. Now the first set of events were pre-recorded on Thursday, and these events included precision passing, which was an accuracy competition in which each quarterback from both conferences attempt to hit as many targets possible in 1 minute. High stakes, which was a multi-round competition in which players attempted to catch the most punts from a jugs machine, JUGS machine, without dropping other balls. So this one ended up relating to something called the lightning round completion from last year. No idea what that was. Closest to the pin. Closest to the pin was a golf accuracy competition in which 6 players from each conference attempted to drive a golf ball as close to the hole as possible. This was a pre-recorded segment held at the par 3 18th hole of the Hawks Landing Golf Course at the Orlando World Center Marriott Hotel. Just stop and think about this for a second. The National Football League had as part of their all-star event a golf accuracy competition. Just think about that for a few minutes. Okay, snapshots. Long snappers and centers snap balls at various targets with different sizes and point values. And then the final one for Thursday, dodgeball. Dodgeball was played by 4 teams of 5 players representing defensive and offensive selections from each conference. And the event took place over 2 games that were both counted for points. Dodgeball. Yeah, I admit I played that in college. But it wasn't for brand supremacy. It was just a bunch of guys getting together and playing dodgeball with each other. Then the second set of events took place live on Sunday, which included flag football, which all 4 quarters were played separately with events in between. These events included kick-tack-toe, where each team's kicker plays a version of tic-tac-toe where they kick balls towards a giant board. Madden NFL head-to-head. 2 players from each conference will play the Madden 24 video game using the official Pro Bowl rosters. And for some reason, they count this as part of the skill competition instead of just being an exhibition event. This one I can justify more than golf and dodgeball. The next event is Gridiron Gauntlet. 6 players from each conference will compete in a relay through an obstacle course, where the first race was held during halftime after the Madden NFL score was added. Something called Best Catch. I'm going to probably butcher these names, and I apologize in advance, but in Best Catch, Puka Nakua, NFC, and David Njoku, NJOKU, AFC, were shown in pre-recorded segments doing special catches around various Orlando landmarks, and a fan vote was run to determine who had the best catches, with the results announced on Sunday and the points added during halftime between the Gridiron Gauntlet games. And finally, Tug of War. Played by 5 players from each conference, which was a best-of-3 series with the team winning the series and earning halftime points. It was basically Tug of War with the NFC's winning 2-0. Could someone explain to me, and I don't give a rat's ass who, explain to me the logic of replacing a seemingly fun and easygoing traditional football game with the NFL's version of a elementary school field day? There's a reason the Pro Bowl never really got big numbers in terms of TV, but why people would want to watch this as opposed to a traditional football game. Because football fans love watching football. Yeah, I don't know if the NFL can figure this one out, but the football fans like watching football. Not a bunch of kids' games being played by a bunch of grown men. And I get that you, like for exhibition games and races, you can have certain gimmicks, but when the entire event is just one series of gimmicks, like a 500 games in one video game compilation, it's just not good. Fans are losing interest because these gimmicks aren't working. And you can have skills contests as part of a All-Star Weekend. The NHL's been doing it for years. And I get skills competitions, but the whole event shouldn't be one giant set of skills competitions with many football games intertwined. And again, once great All-Star games have been gimmicked to the point of stupidity, and they're no longer watching. I'm going to be tuning out from here on out. Sorry. Just sad to see what it is. I don't think they're going to go. I don't think they're going to go back because of the whole like safety concern thing. But there can be ways to do these kinds of things without injuries and blah blah blah. But it's just I'm done with All-Star games, except for the All-Star race and Major League Baseball's All-Star game. If it's just a traditional baseball game, I'll still watch that. And with that, I'm going to take my first break, and then I'm going to discuss something that really grinds my gears. I'll be right back. So I'm back. Now in the past, I've tried not to use my podcast for political grandstanding. I don't want to be that guy who pushes his personal political opinions down your throat, but after reading an op-ed column in the New York Times, I had to discuss this because it just sums up how stupid we are as a culture sometimes. The article in question is called "How Can Jennifer Crumbley Be Guilty of Her Son's Rampage?" It discusses the fact that Jennifer Crumbley, mother of Ethan Crumbley, has been charged with manslaughter after her son committed the Oxford High School shooting in 2021. Now, the charges in question stem from the fact that both their parents were very well aware of their child's mental health issues and actually provided him the gun that he used in the shooting because he was underage and couldn't buy one himself. Now, the article discusses if she should be prosecuted for these kinds of transgressions, and I say she should. Now, I think it's fair to say that in a lot of instances, the families of mass murderers get a lot of undeserved flack. Now, a lot of these parents have been making efforts to get their kids help or have been trying to keep their kids on the right track. Good people can have bad kids. But if parents are making efforts to keep their kids out of trouble and keep their kids in check and keep their kids out of... They're trying to get their kids help, and they're doing they can, but it's just not working. Okay, that's one thing. I'll be sympathetic in that respect. Here, in the case of Jennifer Crumbley, that's not even the case. Jennifer Crumbley knew good and goddamn well that Ethan was having mental health issues. Jennifer Crumbley and her husband weren't doing nearly enough to get her son help, and Jennifer Crumbley and her husband literally handed him the gun that he used in the shooting. She's at the very least guilty of aiding and abetting, if not manslaughter. And I don't care what anyone else thinks. Contrary to what a lot of people think, it isn't wrong to hold parents accountable for their children's actions. Because I've said this before, when you make the decision to have a child, you and you alone are responsible for its upbringing until it reaches the age of 18. You are responsible for everything it watches, eats, reads, plays with, and who it hangs out with. It's not the government's fault. It's not social media's fault. It's not television's fault. It's not the internet's fault, it's your fault if your child grows up to be something like this. And if your child does become a criminal or a mass murderer, the blame does fall on you. I've said this in the past about parents who have let their kids do stupid shit and then act like they shouldn't be held accountable. They absolutely should. You brought them into the world, you raised them until they're 18. If they end up being a dick, it does fall on you. And you can cry as much as you want, it ain't going to change. But this case is actually worse than a lot of them because both parents knew, again, their kid had serious issues. They ignored repeated warning signs. I mean, the signs were all there. And then to top that off, both parents handed their son the gun he used to kill because he wanted one and couldn't buy one on his own. So both parents do share responsibility. And I say this because as I'm recording this, got a little CNN alert on my phone that the case has gone to the jury for Jennifer Crumbley. I hope she gets found guilty. And this is how dumb these two are. Even with all the issues, they still bought him the gun. I admit that I have issues. And if I asked my parents at that age to buy me a gun, even as a joke, they would have involuntarily committed me to an insane asylum. They would medicate the hell out of me. I'd probably still be there today, and I would deserve it. My issues weren't nearly as clear and dangerous as Ethan's were. In what part of their brains did they think that this would lead to anything good? And you know what? We need to start holding parents accountable for their children's actions more often. Because if we did, maybe life would change. We should hold parents responsible, not just for these kinds of shootings, but for crimes in general. And there's a lot of towns and municipalities and jurisdictions that do this. Maybe if we did, parents might wake up. What parents don't seem to understand is between the ages of 0 and 18, your child does not have a right to privacy. You have the right as a parent to search your child's room, computer, journals, and phones. Your children don't have a right to privacy until they reach 18. So if your parents search your room and they find indications that you're going to commit a mass shooting, guess what? You don't have the right to complain, oh, they violated my privacy, or search and seizures. And again, it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me what parents allow their kids to get away with in this day and age. Because I was working on this, and I was thinking about Columbine since I was in high school the day that happened. And knowing what we know now in terms of the investigation, I'm stunned that Eric Harris's parents weren't criminally charged. Now, they were civilly charged and pretty much have lost everything. But knowing what we know about the journals that both Eric and his dad were keeping, I'm kind of surprised he wasn't charged. Because in the journal, at one point, Eric's dad confronted his son and asking him if he was making more pipe bombs. Eric responded that he wasn't, and his dad took this at face value. People, I'm not a parent, I'm not a doctor, but I do know this. If you ever have to ask your son if he is making pipe bombs, let alone making more pipe bombs, hospitalize him immediately. Hospitalize him, medicate the hell out of him, do it immediately. Because unlike some hobbies, making pipe bombs will never lead you anywhere good. If you're familiar with the Columbine story, you know about Brooks Brown. Now, if you're not as familiar with it, Brooks Brown was one of Eric Harris's friends who had run-ins with Eric to the point that the police had gotten involved for stuff that Eric had said on a website in 1999 about wanting to kill Brooks Brown. They had since mended fences. And Brooks Brown has literally gone on record as stating that there was a perfect storm between the lack of attention from the parents and a lack of attention from the police that led to the Columbine shooting. He said, look, if the parents had searched Eric's room and found guns and pipe bombs, that could have prevented the shooting. If the police had finished their due diligence, that could have prevented the shooting. But it didn't. These perfect storms seem to happen a lot. And the fact that a lot of these parents don't get charged for not doing more to help prevent these from happening is amazing. History has been repeating itself a lot, and in this case, you just replace Eric Harris with Ethan Crumbley. Looking at everything objectively, there is no way that these parents aren't guilty. They knew everything was going on, they did nothing to stop it, and they should be tried and sentenced. And I should also mention that the fact that these two ran from the law and hid for a few days after the charges were announced, that says a lot. I hope they are found guilty. I hope they lose everything in the lawsuits. I hope they spend times in jail, and I hope a lot more parents get prosecuted for ignoring these warning signs. Because the more we ignore these warning signs, the more of these shootings are going to happen. Again, your child does not have a right to privacy. You have the right to look through everything that they have, and you have the right to do what you have to do when you find something disturbing. But parents aren't willing to do it, and that's just how it is. And as far as I'm concerned, we should just throw them all in jail when they don't stop their kids from doing these things. Well, I'm going to take my last break, and then we'll discuss a more positive story about Lewis Hamilton next. Welcome back. So I'm going to discuss the news of Lewis Hamilton signing with Ferrari for 2025. It was a major news story not just for Formula One, but for racing in general. Obviously, this is a big deal. Not only is Lewis Hamilton the winningest driver in Formula One, but Scuderia Ferrari is the oldest and most successful Formula One team, pretty much having been there since the second race of Formula One's existence. Ferrari is excited, as is Hamilton, the latter calling it fulfilling a lifelong dream. Now, it is seen as a good move on the surface, which it is, because Scuderia Ferrari is obviously a very successful program and Lewis Hamilton is obviously a very successful driver, but beneath the surface, the water can be a lot muddier. When you look at Scuderia Ferrari versus other teams, it's very clear that Scuderia Ferrari is still run by Enzo Ferrari despite his death in 1988. The Enzo Ferrari management style has gotten results, and at the same time cost results at the same time. I said the same time twice. One quote that sums up Ferrari's program is the Enzo Ferrari quote, "The car was the reason for Ferrari's success." Well, this is an approach that in recent years has proven both successful and problematic. Now, I could discuss the way Ferrari runs their programs for about an hour here, but I'm not going to. All you need to know is that Scuderia Ferrari has this really weird tendency of deciding that employees and drivers have outlived their usefulness, even when they haven't. And this has led to a lot of engineers and drivers being fired only to find success with other teams after the fact. Also, Ferrari has proven itself problematic because they're favoring Italian employees over those born in other countries, which has also not helped their situation. Now, I could give plenty of different stories about the way Ferrari treats its employees, but the one thing that I think sums it up perfectly is that Ferrari will not allow current employees outside of race car drivers to purchase their cars, even if the employee in question could afford them. I mean, you're being loyal to a company that won't allow you to purchase its product. I mean, that should tell you a lot. I mean, I work in a grocery store, and it would be like me saying, hey, we're glad you work here, but you can't shop here. Well, what sense does that make? Why would you be loyal to them in that respect? I mean, that's one perfect example, and there's plenty of others out there if you want to look. Now, at other Formula One teams, the car is set up perfectly for the driver, whereas at Ferrari, the car comes first. And that's the problem. That's the major issue with Ferrari. The car comes first, then the driver. You look at some of the top shelf drivers that could have won multiple championships in Ferrari, but didn't because they couldn't adapt to Ferrari's approach. Now, this is another case of those in charge not realizing that their way that they do things isn't good. Okay? But that's a rant for another day. I mean, and the problem is that the more outspoken you are, the worse you could possibly get. Love him or hate him, no matter what you think, Lewis Hamilton is a very talented driver, but he's also very outspoken. And this can be very problematic when it comes to Ferrari. They decide that some people have outlived their usefulness and they're gone. They fired Alain Prost and paid him a lot of money never to drive for Ferrari again because he had some choice words for one of Ferrari's underperforming cars. And you can't even make the argument that you can't even argue that he was a lot less outspoken than Hamilton is. I would love to be able to sit here and say that I think it's going to work out perfectly and there's going to be a lot of success between the two. But there's a lot of doubt in my mind given all the issues I've discussed. So we're going to stick on Formula One because I was thinking about this the other day. The potential Formula One Chicago Grand Prix, because recently Formula One filed for trademark for the Chicago Grand Prix with the idea of holding a future race in Chicago, which is clearly grandstanding and a shot at NASCAR, because Formula One desperately wants to be the alpha dog in American racing, but given the TV ratings, it's not going to happen. And the Chicago Grand Prix will never happen, because nobody in Chicago will consider this because of the debacle in Formula One. There have been several news stories concerning the fallout from the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and not one of them is positive. I mean, you look at what was spent versus the on-track product. Chicago spent a few million on the 2023 Chicago Street Race. Aside from the weather, it went smoothly, but NASCAR doesn't have any control over that. Chicago doesn't have any control of that. Formula One and Las Vegas spent $500 million for this incarnation of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and it caused nothing but bad publicity, lawsuits, headaches, aggravation. Nothing was positive about it. As much as I like the racing, it was too much to overlook. Nobody in any position of power in the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois will even consider that, even if it was a 10th of that price, even if it was a 20th of that price, for a singular race. Hell no. Oh, and by the way, the citizens of Chicago have been very open about how badly they think the Chicago street race was handled, and it was cheaper with better results. Nobody in Chicago is going to support the idea of a Formula One race in Chicago after what happened in Las Vegas. Nobody's going to support this endeavor. It's not going to work. And I think it would be best if Formula One didn't even bother trying. Don't even bother trying. If you know something is going to fail, don't try. I know it's a radical suggestion, but believe it or not, I've seen it work. Now, just because it's going to fail, sadly, does not mean Formula One won't try. They tried this in Boston a few years ago. They tried this in New York a few years ago. There's probably others that I'm probably forgetting. I mean, they were so desperate. Formula One was so desperate to have a foothold in the United States that they held 2 races in the parking lot of Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. How much more outlaw mud show could you possibly be? Actually, I wouldn't even mind watching them having a race on a dirt track in a mud field somewhere. That might actually get American fans in. But again, it's just Formula One wants to be the big dog in the United States because they know they can't be. And, well, this is what they're trying to do. And it's not going to work. End of story. You know what else? End of podcast. With that, episode 107 comes to an end. I'm Dave Fowles. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'll have some more news, and I'll see you next week.